This is Louis, and if you want to support my channel, head on over to Play Asia. If you don't want to support me there, head on over to J-List. Thank you for supporting my channel, and be sure to look out for new content. All the links can be found in the description.
So this is Louis, and this is going to be a video that is going to have to take the place of the patron video for January. As you can probably tell by the date, it's no longer January, and that's because I changed scripts at the last second, and I haven't actually finished the one I've been working on for the past 2 days. But I think you'll like what the video is going to be. It's not anything really extravagant, but I'm doing it with a purpose. I think that it will serve multiple purposes for my channel and for my brand. But you'll just have to wait for that. So I'm going to be putting that out on Saturday or Sunday. I'm also hoping that I can actually get Subscribestar working. I'm currently trying to troubleshoot that and figure out one way or another if it's working currently or not. Because I've been told by multiple people that other people, their accounts are currently working, but there's a question as to whether mine is working. And if it isn't, I'm going to have to try to see what I can do to talk to Sargon or somebody that can talk to the Russian guy that runs the website and say, hey, what the fuck, how long is it going to take before you fix my account? And I'm hoping that I can use the friends that I have in the back channel that they have with the guy that runs it to get it actually running on my account. But for today, I actually want to talk about something that is quite extraordinary, quite exceptional in terms of someone in the gaming industry, rather than doing what is commonplace through and throughout the industry, which is planting the progressive flag, not just in your company, but also in your product. You have the head of a company, the head of a studio, doing the opposite, and stating over and over again that the content that he's actually working on is not political, and thereby his studio is not political. And that is something that I have been asking of all developers and of all studios for as long as I've been on YouTube. And I can tell you that this is one of the rare times, one of the few times that I have ever seen someone in charge of a studio flat out say that they are not political in what they're doing in their operation, and also that the product that they're producing is not political. And the problem is that with progressives, this is more or less, to them, you shunning them. And I can tell you, without equivocation, this guy internally will get shit for doing this interview. Where he's lucky is that this is some no-name fucking blog that I've never heard of before. That, and he's the head of the studio. Those two things are how he's going to get away with this. Because if this was IGN, if this was Polygon, if this was a incredibly influential, or let me retract that statement, if this was a commonplace name in terms of game journalism, Forbes, what have you, if this was one of those kind of outlets, he probably would have walked this back, and if he didn't, he would have probably caused controversy, because when it comes to progressives, a totalitarian movement, if you are not on their side, you are against them. That is how they will view this. That is how they will phrase this, how they will structure the controversy, and they will demand that this guy, this veteran of the industry and the head of the studio, id Software, they will demand that he bends the knee. They will demand that he plants a flag within his studio in virtue signals that he is a progressive, that his studio is a progressive studio, and that his product is biased in that direction, or is at least diverse, inclusive, blah, 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 all the phrases to signal to progressives that you support their ideology. The developer's name is Tim Willits, or Willits, I believe is how you say it. He is the head of id Software. His title is Studio Director, so I imagine there's no one really above him, at least for that studio. The game in question is Rage 2. Before we get to the interview, which is the impetus for this video, I want to reiterate the fact that I have played Rage 1, and I thought it was garbage. I thought it was one of the worst shooters, one of the most uninspired shooters that I have ever played, period. Ever played. We're talking about AA and AAA and Indie, whatever. In terms of first-person shooters, this is one of the worst I've ever played. And I know that those that have played Rage, the original, and liked it, they will tell you, oh no, the mechanics were fine, this or that was fine, it was open world, etc. Everything was fine. No, it was uninspired, drab, tedious in terms of the gameplay, utterly repetitive, and underdeveloped. It required probably another 6 months to a year of development time to actually come out with a game worth a shit. And they didn't do that. They released it as it was, and it was terrible. Until this point in time, I had zero interest in buying Rage 2. And as of now, after reading the story, I have little to no interest in buying Rage 2. And it is based on how little I thought of the original title. They have addressed the fact, to some degree, those that created the original Rage, the developers behind it, have addressed the fact that it is far from a perfect game. I would say far from a fucking good game. They have addressed the fact that many of us that played it had some pretty severe criticisms for it. And they should do so. They should be addressing that fact. It's a bad thing to say that it is a joke where, why don't I want to play Rage 2? Well, it's because I played Rage 1. That's a joke. But it's an unfortunate fact about gaming, is that oftentimes if you play an original game, the first in a franchise, where you hated it, you're not really likely to then go on and play the sequel. So I'm glad that, at least to some degree, the studio is addressing the fact that the first game, to me, was a piece of shit. I'm glad that they're at least willing to do that, unlike those behind Life is Strange and other games that are trash, where they think it's a great game and they'll never say otherwise. They'll barely even acknowledge the idea that there was errors made. Unlike those studios, at least with id Software, they're going to at least acknowledge that the previous iteration of that game was not great. So to get to the actual interview, Tim Willits went on this blog/outlet called the Six Axis. I have never heard of it until I read this interview. So it's a blog. You know, this is not IGN, this is not Polygon, this is not a mainstream outlet, this is just a blog. Some faggot at this outlet, Stefan I think it is, sat down and spoke to Tim here about Rage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip ahead in this conversation to what actually matters, because the interviewer doesn't really ask Tim, anything of substance at all in this entire interview. But what he does is that this interviewer biases the game, attempts to. He tries to say that this character in the game called, is it Clegg. He tries to say that this character in the game, Clayton, I believe it is a satire of Donald Trump, and attempts to link this game with satirization of the President of the United States, which is political. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have a decent satirization of Trump. I don't imagine it would be that hard to satire Trump, and also in a decent way, in a funny way. But the issue is in 2019, in the current year, $_current year, it's almost impossible to make a Trump joke that isn't fucking awful. Every mainstream comedian is currently mocking the president, and their jokes fucking suck. And it is because they are lazy. They're not actually trying. They're not actually showing a realistic image of Trump and then exaggerating that image. They're not really taking what he does and exaggerating that to make fun of it, such as with George W. Bush or previous presidents that are easy to mock. There were many ways to actually mock Obama in a deep way, in a way that would actually be cutting against him and his persona as a political figure. I imagine that with Trump, it would be just as easy now that he's in power, now that he's president and he's actually doing things. But the thing is that, like I said, you actually have to take a realistic image of him and then exaggerate that. It can't just be fiction, because then you're just making fun of the non-existent. You have to actually base it on reality, and these comedians are unable to do that. I'm not even going to say they're not willing, they're just unable to do it, and that's why modern comedy is fucking shit. So the interviewer brings up characters in the game, and we'll start there. He says, yeah, and I guess also having Walker, who's the protagonist, as a voice character as opposed to the silent protagonist of other games, where it's up to you to think, yeah, okay, that was weird. Yes, says Tim. He'll say, so I have to stick my arm in this thing? The first time you get a power-up, or once Kay Vassar tells you, he's like, okay, so you're telling me I'm the only person who can do this? It's that kind of cheekiness, and it helps people. The interviewer says, do you see if you could get Chuck Norris to voice Walker? Tim responds, that would be funny, and we made those jokes because we're in Dallas. Fort Worth is the home of Walker, Texas Ranger. So the guys were like, you know, that would not go unnoticed. The interviewer says, yeah, I'm sure that's what almost everyone thought of when they heard his name. Tim responds, we should put some Chuck Norris jokes in there, which kind of roll my eyes at, because there's some bars and clubs in Dallas that put Chuck Norris jokes up. Bro, this isn't fucking 2006, okay? Can we please not rehash old dead fucking memes? Can we not rehash fucking memes that have been dead longer than my fucking grandmother? The interviewer then moves on to the actual crux of this and says, maybe the end of Clegg can be a roundhouse kick to the face. Tim responds, maybe, yes, and then he laughs. That's when the interviewer makes this political. So Clegg's an interesting one. I'm assuming that he's running for president or something. Tim responds, see, it's so funny. All of you Europeans, I never got that question from an American journalist. And I questioned that, by the way. So no, we are not political. I promise you, we are not making a statement. He leans into the microphone. We are not political in the game. I hate to break it to you there, Tim, but that by itself is a statement. You might be in Texas, as far as I'm aware, but the fact is that you're still in America in the current year. And if it isn't biased in favor of progressive politics, then you are opposed to it. That's not my standard. That is their standard, because they are a totalitarian movement. It's either within the fold or it is challenging them. This is what happens when you have cultural hegemony. You only stand to lose. And so everything needs to be reinforcing that hegemony. A monolith can't stand without a very good foundation holding it up. The interviewer asks the question a second time, just reiterates it, but you are taking the piss out of him, meaning Trump. Tim responds, no, we're not. Clegg the character was actually designed before Trump became president. Our writer in Stockholm came up with him, but no, he's not a Donald Trump reference, I promise. The interviewer just denies what he's saying and says, okay, well, he's clearly Trump, but maybe not Trump as president. He's even got the same hair. You can't deny that. Tim laughs in response and says, I'm saying we're not political. We have a Trump on our board of directors, and I believe it's one of Trump's sons, if I remember correctly, that is on the board of ZeniMax. The president's brother, the president's brother is on the ZeniMax board of directors. The interviewer then gives a laugh. Ha ha, so maybe that's why you're not allowed to be political. Fine. From one non-political company to another non-political company, wink, wink, then were you amused or annoyed by Far Cry New Dawn borrowing your color palette? And this is actually something that I've addressed, where the color palette to this game and to that game, neither are original, by the way. Neither one of those games are original in that color palette. I've talked about it another time, but there's at least two other games that have used very similar color palettes in the past, and I believe that both of them were stealing that idea off of other games. But I'll read this response just because it's here. Oh, that was funny. We were thinking about the timeline because we came up with the design and marketing well in advance of when we announced thing, and we were looking at the timeline and how long we designed things out, and we're like, yep, Don't know where that came from. But that's the end of this interview in terms of this interviewer trying to pressure Tim here in conceding that this is, this character in the game is a political satirization of Trump. And in response, this head of the studio, director, said outright, this is not political, the content of the game is not political, they are not a political studio, and he himself is not planting his flag as a partisan. Like I said at the beginning of this video, this is different. This is abnormal. This is exceptional. It is not, I think, that every fucking studio is biased or leaning in this direction, in progressive's direction. It is the fact that this guy is vocalizing his neutrality. Because vocalizing your neutrality to a progressive is unacceptable. I would be willing to wager, let's say $1,000, that if this was Polygon or IGN or Reset Era, whatever, whoever's doing the interview with this guy, if it were one of those locations where this was be picking up a lot of attention, this would be being put on Reddit and the rest, this would have been a controversy. Him stating that the content of the game is not political, that he is not being political, and the character in the game, Clegg, who this interviewer is referencing as a Trump satirization, him denying all of it is itself a statement to them. To me, this is what every single studio and every single developer at a studio should be saying. They should not be declaring their political partisanship. They should not be declaring their game political. They should not be declaring anything in relation to their studio because they do not speak for every member of their studio. These studios should be focused on creating art that is going to turn a profit. They should be focusing on the fact that gamers, their consumers, are not interested in partisan bullshit content. We're not interested in walking simulators outside of someone such as myself buying it ironically, enjoying it ironically, laughing at it, and my audience, as small as it may be, laughing at the content of this shitty game created by partisan developers. If making woke propaganda was anything other than a studio killer, we would be talking about Telltale's next game. We would be talking about BioWare's future, outside of the fact that rumors are all around the studio right now saying that if Anthem is a fucking failure, that the plug may finally be pulled by fucking EA, because EA right now is hemorrhaging investment. And I talked about that a long time ago, months ago. I was saying that divestment from EA is what's gonna fucking kill it if they don't get their shit together. And by all appearances, they aren't getting their shit together. People can credit Battlefield 5. That is not the issue. It is divestment from the actual parent company. So, what EA needs to do is produce content that sells, that generates profit, that is not controversial, that is actually showing investors that it is a good deal to invest in their company. And right now, it is the absolute fucking opposite. And guess what? You still have to pay operating costs. And if BioWare, a massive studio, is not producing hits, is not producing profitable games, eventually it has to be axed to mitigate the fact that you are losing profit, but your costs are still just as high. More studios, more developers at those studios, and especially developers in leadership positions, should be looking at Tim as an example of what you do in this industry, because this doesn't alienate people like me. It draws me in. I am then forced to recognize that this person, despite the fact that I might have problems with the content and the quality of their games, at least they're not a partisan fucking asshole. At least they're not going to drive me up a wall because they're going to be putting progressive garbage in their games and virtue signaling about it. To me, Tim is a professional. Tim is mature. Tim is not a political radical. He is instead focusing on art, the content of what his studio is producing. That, to me, is something that I want to see more of. And I think that Tim deserves credit, and I'm giving him credit, personal credit, that may mean nothing to anyone but me, but I am giving him personal credit for this interview and this stance. I am not sold on your game, but you have moved me to a better position of being willing to buy your game because you are willing to stand up to what is happening in the gaming industry and just declare your neutrality. Just declare that you are in fact trying to make a good game, a fun game, a game that I'm going to like and everyone else is going to like, that we should be interested, that we should buy. You're focusing on that and not on politics. That deserves credit because, as I've been saying, it is exceptional in this garbage, dying industry. People talk about Blizzard and, they talk about Ubisoft, but I think the worst example is probably Bethesda. They talk about the studios and the problems they're having, but I'm telling you, EA is in the worst of all positions. Of all these different parent companies, they are in the worst of all positions. One of the ways they got where they are now is disrespecting their customers. Never even just pretending to not be a politically biased company. They've always been pushing politics such as what we've seen from so many different studios. Progressive bullshit. They've been pushing that kind of ideology and pushing it into their games for years. And while it's a minority that gives a damn about that, the quality of the games have suffered, in my opinion, as a direct result. When you're focusing on your game passing the Bechdel test, you're not actually focusing on the quality of the game. You're just focusing on making the right game. You're not focusing on making quality games. And oftentimes there is a mutually exclusive decision to make. It's one or the other. You have to decide whether you're making the right game to appease progressives, placate the progressives and journos, or if you're making a good game, one that your consumers will like and buy. Many studios have made the right games, and they're suffering as a direct result. You pushing propaganda in the form of t-shirts during Obama's administration, a program from his White House, you pushing that content into your games is not selling copies. You including updates into your games that pander to LGBT organization activists, you pandering to them and pushing that content into your game and creating a laundry list of bugs that are never fucking fixed, breaking aspects to expansions to your game based on that unnecessary update. You doing that lowers the quality of the game. I don't even remember how many years ago it was that that update was put out. And it's something you have to install with The Sims 4. It's in the base game. It's unavoidable. That patch broke the open for business, or whatever the fuck it's called, expansion. It broke it. And they never fixed the bugs that were created from it. Never. Still right now, I can launch the game. Those bugs are still there. It's because you're focusing on making the right game and not a quality one. If you were focusing on quality, you would be fixing the fucking bugs you're creating. Political propaganda in games is ruining this medium. It has been for years, and what we need is for more developers, more studios to follow the example of Tim here and just focus on turning a profit and putting out content that I want to buy. I have been a gamer, and a hardcore one for years, but a gamer for 2 decades, over 2 decades. I am your target audience. I am who you want to sell to. Disposable income, still young enough not to have a family, although I'm entering into that age where it's likely to start being an issue, but I am the one that is going to spend money on your content. When you chase the audience of something like Fortnite, you are chasing that of a fad. When you chase the fad of foreign audiences and the Chinese cell phone market, you are chasing something that your base is not fucking interested in, such as what's going on with Blizzard and their stupid phone game. That's not what their target audience, what their base wants. I have been buying EA games for about as long as I've been a gamer, so for 2 decades. I may outlast the company in terms of buying games. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't abandon this industry, although if I had any fucking intelligence, I would. It is the fact that this industry, the Western industry, has turned its back on its target audience, on those that buy its content. They have turned away from us. And what they need to do is turn back around. Stop staring into the fucking sun that is progressive politics, melting your eyes and making you blind. Turn the fuck around. Face your audience. Males, majority white, from age 18 to 45. Probably 40. That's probably where the cutoff is. But that is the demographic, that is the majority, heavy majority, that plays your games, that buy your products. Those are your customers. Pandering to demographics outside of that I just named. So anything other than what I just named, majority white, heavily, overwhelmingly male, age 18 to 40, that is the demographic that is buying your products. Pander to them. They are the ones giving you money. Stop pandering to phantom audiences that are never going to buy your games. Stop pandering to activists that are not gamers in the first place, that are not consumers of your products, customers in the first place. Stop pandering to those that don't buy your games. Pander to me. I buy games. As I said at the beginning of this, I have a Patreon video to finish, and that's going to be my final one before I delete my Patreon account. That's coming soon, by the way. It's going to be February, but it's almost done. And once it is, I'm hoping that I will... Well, I have alternatives that I can work with, but I'd like to have just the steady income of a platform like that. I'm trying to work through that, but it's going to happen soon. Thanks for listening.